Welcome, everyone, to our webinar this week on troubleshooting Citrix issues for remote workers. I'm Kyle, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm joined today by Avi Lip, who is a senior technical consultant here at Goliath, and we have George Spiers, who is a Citrix CTP. Today's session will be in the form of a Q&A, and we've already received some pre-submitted questions, but I'll also be taking questions during the webinar as time allows. If we don't get to your question during the webinar session, we will follow up with you via email. George will be lending his expertise and firsthand knowledge to your inquiries. In fact, we'll use the questions we received today to demonstrate where our technology can assist in those scenarios. For anyone wondering if a recording of this webinar will be available, yes, within 28 to 48 hours of the completion of the webinar, you'll receive a copy of this recording in your inbox that you can refer back to or share with other colleagues who were unable to attend today's session. So with that, let me go ahead and give a more proper introduction to our guest, George Spiers. For those that do not know George, he's a very active blogger, evangelist, author, speaker, and solution architect around not only Citrix, but other solutions, as you can see here. He's been highly certified, being a Citrix CTP since 28, and certified on network and virtualization. He's a Microsoft certified solution expert, and I know we have some health systems attendees on the line today, so you should know he's also Epic certified. I think this is your latest certification here, George, and we were just talking about the impact of the pandemic on healthcare and the user experience before we got started. So, George, as always, thank you for joining us today. Before I turn it over to George and to your questions, to give a little bit of background around some of the current challenges of remote work and how our technology is able to assist with those challenges, I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about Goliath. Here on the screen, you'll see a number of logos for companies who use Goliath today throughout their organizations. I want to point out a few things. Every one of these logos that you see are for organizations and health systems who have turned to Goliath so that we can help them monitor and troubleshoot end user experience issues, whether their workers are remote or on-prem today. And what they will all tell you is that they selected Goliath because of our embedded intelligence and automation, which lets us proactively identify their entire environment and knows what to alert on, how to alert, and any thresholds that are exceeded. They'll be alerted using best practice thresholds that come from Citrix, VMware, Horizon, and Microsoft, as well as our own knowledge from working with all these organizations. Our embedded intelligence and automation results in ease of use and the ability to really isolate and prove root cause issues. Each of these organizations will tell you that Goliath has the operational impact of hiring 2 to 3 full-time troubleshooting experts. And I think, George, you're going to point this out, right? Lack of Citrix expertise can be very frustrating for those of you that are experts supporting the team when you want to go ahead and work on core improvements. But there you are, spending your days troubleshooting end user issues. As you can see, we scale up to support some of the largest infrastructures, but we also have an ease of use and price profile that allows us to meet the needs of small to medium-sized organizations as well. And then finally, and we'll hit on this a few times throughout the webinar, we do have a focus on healthcare. The reason that we are known as a health IT standard is we have business and technical relationships with all the major EMR vendors, Cerner, Epic, Meditech, and Allscripts. Because of those relationships, we have purpose-built modules for each of them, and we're the only vendor in this area that has these specific modules that allows you to get full visibility across your Citrix and Horizon environment, user behavior, plus performance metrics from your applications. If anyone wants to know more on that, we can answer any questions later on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to George, who's going to talk a little bit about his experience and the issues this pandemic has really amplified when it comes to supporting remote workers. George?
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for having me. And also hello to everyone who's joined us today. So I want to begin by talking about the challenges IT pros face supporting remote workers, certainly more so now than ever before. Remote working adds many layers of complexity onto our investigations, and also when troubleshooting the end user issues. And that's because a lot of the time we don't have the information we need to be successful in effective troubleshooting. So we're led to point our finger at different parts of the infrastructure which you think is the problem. For example, like the network, but you don't actually have the rock solid evidence to support your assumptions. You also have lack of visibility into new parts of the connection that you never really had to think about when users were working on premises. So that is the remote connection that the end user is connecting in from, and also the device of choice that they use to connect. Nobody knows for sure what device an end user is going to use and where exactly they're going to try and connect from. Albeit, you can have a certain level of control of device choice if you do wish. The other challenge is that whilst our end users are remote, the IT teams, they're often remotely spread out as well. So this leads also to communication challenges. Obviously, communication is key when troubleshooting to find root cause. As an example, you can't just reach over to a colleague in the office and share your thoughts and ideas to troubleshoot an end user issue. And these common challenges also spread out to management as well, and also vendors, making it more difficult to keep management up to date, and also to engage with vendors if you require that additional support. And setting communication aside, data and analytics are definitely most important, in my opinion, to understanding issues and what is going on. And we don't often have enough of the data to make a difference. And without that data, we actually spend more time troubleshooting issues because we don't have that much needed assistance. We don't have the proof or evidence at all to back up anything that we're trying to troubleshoot. And then again, with remote working, we are going to have to rely more on end user feedback. And that's because the tools that we have, they actually leave gaps, and that makes troubleshooting more difficult. But the thing is with end user feedback is it can often be negative, and that could be for various reasons. So ultimately, many times the user feedback doesn't actually help with our investigations, so we don't progress the incidents as we would like to. So moving into the next slide, this is basically showing the complexity that I just mentioned. And it's the complexity basically of a Citrix environment, and it's what IT administrators have to support every day. And it also shows why there is in-depth knowledge required. You have to have the in-depth knowledge of Citrix, and that's to ensure that things run as best they can 24/7. So keep in mind, the end user never really sees what it actually takes behind the scenes to connect to their published apps or desktops, wherever they are and from whatever device they choose. And also you have a number of different teams that support all the different infrastructure pieces that are actually required to make Citrix work and make those applications and desktops work. So from the left side of the slide, you can see that you have our end users and they initiate ICA connections to their virtual apps desktops. So end users, as I say, could be connecting from on-premise locations such as the office, whilst others, and probably the majority of your users, will be connecting remotely from home. And users could be situated all over the country. They use all different types of devices, from home PCs to corporate laptops or to personal mobile devices. And much of the time also, IT do find it difficult to manage and monitor all these endpoints because they're remote, and especially when the devices are personal. These devices could be running low on RAM or CPU. They could be running Windows XP or older operating systems. They could be unpatched. They could also be running older workspace versions or Citrix receiver versions. And all these different characteristics raise the likelihood that help desk tickets will be logged due to maybe slowness within applications when working remotely, slow logons, or just general access issues from home. And a lot of the time, again, it isn't actually a Citrix problem that causes these. So as we move to the right-hand side of the slide, you have the data center, and this is where all your core Citrix components reside. So you could have a mixture of Citrix Gateway, storefront, delivery controllers, and also obviously your desktops and application servers. And all of these different servers and devices, they need to be maintained and monitored 24/7. And I think it's more important to maintain things now 24/7 because I've found in my experience with people now working from home, they don't even have a specific shift pattern, like a 9 to 5. You could find that they come on at night for a couple hours, or maybe during the day when they don't normally work during the day. So also keep in mind of that, and that's something I've certainly seen. Also, you could have Citrix Cloud, and this adds further complexity. So you might be using the gateway service from Citrix Cloud or Citrix Workspace, and you will also have cloud connectors run within your data center. So these are new devices that you'll have to monitor and maintain. And then again, if you're a cloud customer or you're still on premises, you could have different backend systems like your SQL servers or your Citrix license servers. And of course, you'll always have Active Directory and your profile servers where your user profiles will be stored. So with all the different components at play here and all the potential different teams that manage them, like the network teams and storage teams, I mean, it's truly a large effort to make everything not just work, but also work well. And I talk about some of this, which was the demand for Citrix expertise versus the supply of Citrix experts. You see that we have our demand of expertise versus the actual pool of experts that are available in the market. So in my experience, when you run a virtual apps and desktops deployment, you need roughly 2, maybe 3 Citrix experts to support it. And these are dedicated experts. These aren't really someone that touches on Citrix, but also touches on Exchange and Active Directory. They really need to be dedicated to the Citrix environment. And to be honest, this does keep in line with other technologies, so like Active Directory, again, VMware, Exchange. They will also have their own dedicated teams managing those services. So Citrix is no different. And whilst we have the demand for Citrix expertise, and it is high, the Citrix experts and the supply of those experts doesn't actually match. So the supply is actually low, and that's one of the reasons why expertise is in demand in the first place. And whilst the demand and supply is, whilst the expertise is in demand and the supply is low, our experts, again, something I see, they actually spend 25 to maybe even 30% of their time troubleshooting those basic end user tickets. That's something that I call firefighting. So whilst the Citrix expert is firefighting basic tickets, their true value is not being ingrained into the Citrix solution. And that would be the bigger picture. And it would probably improve and stabilize the environment if the Citrix expert was to do the stuff that they're probably employed to do rather than the firefighting. So I guess what is one simple solution to this problem? We can leverage purpose-built software, which can help act as that second Citrix expert, basically. So and it's also not to mention that I think purpose-built monitoring is more important today, given that remote working situation where it's more difficult to troubleshoot end-user issues. So we actually need a tool that provides the intelligence and automation to monitor and troubleshoot the end-user experience. We also need a tool that anticipates issues before they happen, and that could be by testing the entire infrastructure. So your storefront servers, the delivery controllers, the storage, and so on. And we need a tool that can test that and test that at various points of the day in an automated fashion. And if any issues happen, they can alert you so you can fix any potential issue before end users are impacted. We also need a tool that helps troubleshoot the issues. And this can be done by providing deep and broad metrics to the Citrix administrator. So this is the data you need to reduce the amount of time that you actually spend wondering where the problem lies. And it eliminates that finger pointing that I mentioned, pointing the finger at the network team or the network rather, the storage. The data helps to avoid that. And then finally, you must also have a tool that can help document the root cause. And that's so you can work on a permanent fix. Or even you could show evidence to your management team that the fix has been put in place. Or you could liaise with IT teams or vendors to work alongside you. So if the problem isn't actually Citrix related, you can show the proof and help troubleshoot with other vendors and other teams. Stacey, do you want to take the next slide?
Yeah, so I really appreciate that, George, the overview and really talking about some of the challenges and some of the best practices to overcome those challenges. So with that, we're going to go ahead and respond to some questions that we got proactively in advance of the webinar. And then for those attending, please do submit additional questions so that we can answer them for you. So let's move into the first question. I hear this a lot, so I'm sure, George, you get it right. How, as an IT admin, can I prove that home Wi-Fi is the root cause of poor session performance?
Yeah, we definitely hear it a lot. We heard it a lot before COVID, so you can imagine how much we hear it now. And you guys on the call, you probably hear it a lot also. I mean, how many times have you seen someone say that Citrix is slow? And to be honest, it is difficult to pinpoint where the problem lies, especially if you don't have the right tools in place. So with the remote working and the user connecting maybe from their home Wi-Fi, you probably have the suspicion that it's the user's home network. And that could be because you have hundreds of other users connect remotely, but they're not reporting the same problem. So maybe it's just one user or two users. But it's actually proving it. Proving is the bigger difficulty. However, understanding latency metrics may help. It's not so common to look at latency for users that are connecting from the office, from the corporate offices, because latency generally isn't a concern for the internal users. But with users working from home, latency does become a user experience factor, and that can really make or break a user's satisfaction with their Citrix environment. So one of the latency metrics we have is ICA-RTT. And this is basically the time between the user clicking something or typing into a virtual app or desktop and the moment their action is displayed to them on their screen. So for example, maybe you're clicking on a menu drop-down or typing up an email. Basically, the higher this ICA-RTT metric is, the longer the user waits until they see the desired results on their screen. And then secondly, you have ICA latency. And this is the bottom line latency. So you can think of this as basically the latency between the ICA stack on the client PC, which could be anywhere in the world if the user is remotely connected, and the Citrix server, which is typically in your data center, or it could be in a cloud such as Azure. So what numbers are actually good and bad when it comes to latency? And there isn't a golden rule. There's no right answer specifically for this. So in my experience, I like to categorize the latency numbers into great latency, which is somewhere between 20 to 180 milliseconds. Good latency, which is somewhere between 180 and 240 milliseconds, and then poor being above 240 milliseconds. Obviously, keep in mind that latency will always fluctuate from 1 second. It could be in the good category, then it could drop to poor. I mean, you could have good latency, then somebody else in your house decides to stream Netflix or download something, and all of a sudden your latency could drop into the poor category. So again, it's always going to fluctuate. And also there's a lot of traffic on the internet that you can't control that could impact the latency also. Avi, do you want to show how maybe purpose-built tools can help with pinpointing the root cause to a user's home Wi-Fi?
Absolutely, George. So what I'm going to pull up within the Goliath console right now is our Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop session display. And this screen populates with all of the Citrix sessions in your environment. It shows all the users, how they connected into the environment, and a variety of other metrics, where this is where our clients will come to really find resolution as to what could be causing performance issues. So say when a user does call in saying that they're working from home and they're having performance issues, or the technology proactively alerts you to that, what you just do is select on the user's name, and this is for active and historical sessions as well, so you can pull up a session that they were talking about from last week if you wanted to. You click on the user, and what will populate here is a screen that has all the high-level key data points that went into that user's session. So the client endpoint, how they connected into the environment, delivery controller that was brokering the session. You have a logon summary breakdown here, as well as all these dedicated tabs at the top. But where I'm going to focus on for this troubleshooting exercise, which is where you have, again, a remote user saying that they're having, experiencing latency from their home office. the troubleshooting workflow really goes with where you start off with round trip time here, as George just described what this metric is, where you're trying to identify, was this user actually having latency within their session. So this is all correlated for the time frame of the user's session, and you have these different threshold marks right here where orange would be for if it's a caution threshold mark, and then the red would be like, okay, this user is definitely experiencing latency within their session because they have a high round trip time. Now, next, you want to kind of determine, okay, was it a network related issue, or was it more of a resource utilization issue that was the root cause? And that's where you take a look next here at network latency, which is real-time network latency from the ICA protocol itself. This isn't an ICMP or ping-based test. And so what I'm looking for here is when there's the points where the user's experiencing latency within their session, was network latency also high? And I can see just in this case, that was the case. As soon as this user was having issues, it looks network latency went from a lower metric, 27 milliseconds up to, 200 milliseconds. Now I want to determine, because this user is a remote user, is it because of the amount of bandwidth that's available at that user's location? And what I can see here is in this connection speed metric, which is the amount of bandwidth that's available for Citrix Receiver or the Workspace app at that user's location. Was there anything that can correlate with that high network latency, such as a sudden drop in connection speed that's available for that user? So this could be a simple case where it's like you're talking to the user, you have this objective evidence saying, okay, well, I can see at 1043 to 1046, there was a huge drop in connection speed at your location, because the user could say, oh, well, I have the highest amount of ISP bandwidth available. But then it's, okay, well, were there other people at the house that were utilizing the network as well? Oh, yeah, the kids are all streaming Netflix. Oh, they're streaming, Xbox, which is hogging the bandwidth, restricting this user Citrix session from having the amount of bandwidth to perform optimally for it. So by looking at just these three graphs here, you can quickly come up with the conclusion as far as the user was having an issue, it was caused by the network, and specifically the amount of bandwidth that was available at that user's location. And again, if it wasn't a a network related issue, right on the single pane of glass here, you can see the VM resources as well as the hypervisor host resources to see if it was more of a resource utilization issue. You also do have a dedicated IC and HDX tab here, which can provide additional insight into the round trip time, network latency, ICA latency, as well as the connection speed available at that user's location. So that's a quick way how you can come up with a conclusion and prove that it was the home Wi-Fi available at the end user's location. That could be the root cause of the poor performance issues. With that, I believe we are now going to go to the next question. Let me pull that up.
So the next question, due to COVID and remote working, their Citrix environment has basically doubled in size. And so the question is, now that they've got more, do they need to monitor this differently with their larger deployment?
Yeah, I guess the short answer is, yeah, there is. Obviously, the expansion. With the expansion, there's probably more things that have the potential to go wrong. So I guess that's the short answer of it. But since the demand on Citrix has obviously grew, you want to ensure that all the Citrix components are closely monitored. You also want to be monitoring like bandwidth that are coming into your data center or your net scalers, for example, or bandwidth to your VDAs also. CPU and RAM consumption across all your servers, not just your workloads of your VDAs, but also the management servers, as much as even Active Directory, your profile servers, and so on. Everything needs to be monitored closely, and it needs to be a priority. You need to ensure also that those resource constraints don't creep into your network, because they can start impacting your end users, and that will obviously generate a lot of help desk calls, which you don't want. And you should also, as I say, focus on other monitoring infrastructure components, so like the network, like the storage, because when you expand the Citrix environment, it is obviously going to be more hungry for resources. So you may not have expanded on your network infrastructure, your storage infrastructure. So you really just need to keep in mind that they could be more under strain. So you need to monitor them closely. And also, you want to make sure you have the right thresholds and alerting set up, and that's to match your new scaled environment. So the numbers are always going to be different. You're going to have more users logging on to different desktops, different apps, logging on through NetScaler. Maybe you have VPN and so on. And you want to adjust thresholds that maybe made sense when the environment was smaller, but don't make sense now. So you want to make sure those alerting thresholds are right, so that you not just you don't want to get false alerts. You want to get the right information at the right time to help. But the monitoring techniques that you do today, I mean, they would largely still apply, in my opinion. It's just a larger environment. There's just more to monitor, but your techniques shouldn't overly change. So you should still incorporate, whatever morning tasks you do or evening tasks, and you should still, just monitor things sort of as you used to, just on a larger scale. But I would like to then hand it over to Avi to see if, from a purpose-built monitoring solution, is there anything that can help with that additional skill?
Absolutely, George. Thanks for that insight. And I completely agree with everything that George just mentioned. And one of the things that can definitely help out with these larger deployments is a proactive piece of the technology or proactive functionality that can alert you to performance issues prior to end users being impacted. So one of the features within Goliath is our application availability monitor, which is basically launching sessions, Citrix sessions, VMware Horizon sessions, from whether it's remote facilities, different office branches. You can have this be deployed in the cloud, where what it's doing is launching Citrix or Horizon sessions, 24/7 if you wanted to, testing all the components that contribute to providing an end user experience, and making sure that they're all working properly and together. So if there were to be an issue at any point in time, you would then receive a real-time alert giving you a buffer period to get ahead of those issues prior to end users being impacted. Here's just a kind of a quick deployment architecture where you'd have your Citrix delivery infrastructure, and then you'd have those virtual users, if you will, that are launching the sessions, testing for the applications and desktops at the different locations, or again in the cloud, to confirm the availability so that end users, when they're logging in for the day, you'll know that they have access to those resources. But if there was an issue and you receive an alert, where you'd want to go to troubleshoot is our application availability analysis console. And this is the central monitoring configuration console for this proactive feature of the technology, where it's broken down to two different dashboards. The top section here is a high-level dashboard where the blue bars represent the average launch time, and then the yellow trend line shows the overall availability at any point in time. You can filter this based off of date range. You can filter it based off the different locations where you're having these launches take place from. For example, one of our healthcare clients that has, over 40 different, hospital facilities and clinics across the country, they have one of these deployed at each one of those locations to test to confirm that their mission critical applications are all available for their clinicians. And then you have the specific applications and desktops that you want to be testing. At the bottom of the page, similar details, date and time of the launch, the specific resource, the location where the launch was taking place from, the session host if it was a successful launch, as well as details as far as was the launch successful or did it fail. Now these are all successful launches, but imagine if there was a failed launch. What I would do to take a look at what was going on would be click this magnifying glass, where you have details of each step of the launch, as well as screenshot evidence of exactly what would have presented itself to the end user. So that this really takes away the troubleshooting step of having to ask the end users to replicate what they're seeing, because you have that information right here. So that's one proactive feature within the technology that could be helpful for planning for these larger deployments, just to, again, make sure that those resources are available for the end users. Now with that, let me go back to, George, I didn't know if you were going to say something else there.
Yeah, I was just going to add that the screenshot feature is, it's really useful, because when users have a launch issue, and the last thing you want is a massive log file that you got to scroll through to find a single line of what the actual problem is. I think the screenshot functionality would definitely make the administrators' lives easier, because they really see that proof in a graphical format, and it would really reduce any time spent on troubleshooting the issues. So I do think it's a real powerful feature.
Awesome. Thanks, George. I guess we'll carry on to the next question.
This one's, I think, maybe a little bit broader. How can IT admins isolate and document root cause of remote worker issues? And maybe I'll take this a bit further, if I may, George. Even in your day-to-day, how has your troubleshooting workflows, how have they changed? Knowing that most of your users are remote, what are some of the strategies or tips and tricks that you use when you're trying to isolate their issues?
Yeah, so it has changed. A lot of times when you look at the perimeter of your network, more so than anything, I think if a user was reporting of, say, slowness, and they were an internal user, you would probably go straight to checking what desktop they were connected to. Is it having any issues? And then maybe work your way up from there. But with it being remote users, a lot of the time I find myself in checking the latency, as we discussed already, and checking the networking side of things first. So maybe it's the Citrix gateway that the user comes through, or the VPN. Trying to troubleshoot from that side, then working the way into the data center. So it's a little different in that respect. And it's also difficult and time consuming to isolate and document the root cause, especially if you don't have the right tools. And again, as I've mentioned before, we don't get the visibility into the user's home network. We don't get any real information on what devices they're going to use. And obviously this is going to make our lives more difficult when we're troubleshooting these issues. And also the organization may not have the right tool set. So maybe the tool set works for internal users, but it may not work for a remote workforce. But you have to just use what you have and try to get on with it and troubleshoot as best you can to find the root cause. And going forward, what we really do need is the purpose-built solutions. As Avi showed, they contain tons of information. It's the data and evidence that they show, and that can really help pinpoint the cause of those remote worker issues. So those Citrix slow complaints, I mean, if they reach the help desk, a lot of the time it goes to the Citrix admin. And that's because a lot of the time the help desk don't necessarily know where they should begin looking. So they send a ticket to you, and then you start investigating. If it's the user's home network, which a lot of the time it is, a lot of the time it's not Citrix. It's one user that's reporting slowness, it's their network. But you need that purpose-built tool because it's able to report on the user's connection metrics, like Avi showed in his demo. And it doesn't actually just show the connection metrics in real time, but it also gives you the historical view. So you could go back maybe a week and see that the user was still having that slow experience and it's coming from their network. So that's just the more data that you have, the more chance that you have at pinpointing where the issue actually lies. It just allows you to make more informed decisions. Where is the root cause? Where do you need it to apply your fix? And can you actually prove that the root cause and the fix is resolved? So that's certainly my thoughts on that. Avi, you able to expand any more on that?
Sure, George. Thanks. So a couple different ways that you can, when you're talking about isolating the root cause of performance issues, there's so many different, aspects of, again, delivering that, great end user experience, that it could be the home network, as we just talked about, but it could be a number of different areas. So within the same Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop session display here, again, you can go back historically for past sessions. Not only can you just see obviously the connection speed of that user's location, how that correlates with round trip time, but then within the same console you have the session host metrics. So say if CPU is spiking during that session, is there memory paging, disk latency? You can also then correlate that with hypervisor host metrics. Maybe the users who's complaining about the performance issues, it wasn't really them that was doing something wrong, but it could have been maybe another user that was being supported by that same hypervisor host at that time, where maybe it was a number of users that were on that same hypervisor host. And you can see in the technology all the VMs that were being supported by that hypervisor host during the time frame of that session, to see maybe if it's some of the other users that you should really be talking with as far as their best, what they're doing within their session. And as far as for what those users are doing within their session, going back to this IC and HDX tab here, at the bottom left chart right here, this is the ICA channel usage graph. And what this shows here is the ICA channel is broken up into virtual channels, as George was talking about earlier. And with these different channels, you can be able to see, based off the type of bandwidth that's being utilized within the session, what the user was doing. So you can see here at the top, you have end user experience bandwidth metrics here. So audio bandwidth. Was this user streaming audio during their session? Were they listening to Pandora, Spotify? Clipboard bandwidth. Did they have a large copy and paste file that hung up the session? You have thin wire bandwidth, which is the Citrix display adapter. So was the user doing something graphically intensive? Were they streaming a sporting event in the background that was also, that could have been causing performance issues? Because not every user is going to follow Citrix best practices. So sometimes it could be something that the user was actually doing that could impact the performance of the session, when that would then prevent, you could have been spending time taking a look at the network or other areas in the environment when it was actually the end user that was causing the performance issues themselves. And by having this graph here, you can correlate, say for example, if round trip time was high, maybe thin wire bandwidth was high at that same time. And then it's like you can have a data-driven conversation with the end user, being like, hey, I see at the time you're having issues that however you want to talk to the end user, maybe they won't know what thin wire bandwidth is, but say, hey, we see that something graphically intensive was being done. What we're doing is like, oh yeah, I was streaming that, sporting event at that same time. So then cut that out, and the session goes back to being satisfactory. So we also have say if logon issues are, a common problem. We have some of our, other tools in the industry will give you like 6 to 8 different stages. We'll give you 33 plus stages of the logon process, where you can see what's going on at the delivery controller and Citrix receiver for the brokering stages. And this is without deploying any technology to the endpoint machine themselves. We get all this through our integration with Citrix. And then at the bottom, you have the session host logon stage details. So client validation, server validation, authentication, you can see which OUs that user was a part of, domain controller details. And for group policies, we're able to break open each group policy down to the policy name and how long it took to execute, so that you can real quickly be able to identify for long logons, where was the main contributing factor. With this Gantt chart, it's easy to see where you need to focus your attention instead of wasting time looking around the environment, where you can quickly be able to see here what was causing the issue. So that's just one way to isolate root cause and be able to then, with all this information, you can always document it, with the data, and whether share this information with colleagues, share it with the end users themselves or vendors or management. So that is one way to do that.
Yeah, and I just want to add the amount of information that you've shown. You could imagine that if you didn't have this tool, how many other products would you have to rely on, right? So maybe if you got a report, again, I'll use the Citrix flow, it's common. You might check Director to get the logon times, but you might have to check VMware's console to check CPU and RAM and so on. You might have to check just various different consoles and screens to get the amount of information that's provided within, obviously, the single pane of glass that Goliath provides. So with the amount of data that you're provided by Goliath, that really does drive down the amount of time it's going to take to find root cause. So I just want to point that out as well.
Great point. Thanks, George. Let's go to the next question.
So this one has come up a lot more with the pandemic and people looking at how they can grow to support their users. Is now the time for anyone looking to expand their user base? Is now the time for them to look into expanding into the cloud and with Citrix Cloud? What are your thoughts on that, George?
I think it's one of the questions that the answer is it depends. We've probably heard the it depends answer a lot of times, but I think we're thinking about Citrix Cloud. It really depends on the situation and also your organization's situation. There's no right or wrong answer, but I mean, if you're looking to expand your Citrix user base to the point that you maybe need to build out your management infrastructure, so maybe you need to build more storefront servers or SQL instances or delivery controllers, you might weigh up that effort building out all those components. They require server builds, operating system installs, patches, software installs, the networking elements. They obviously require more storage and so on, firewall policies, everything else. That effort versus moving and expanding into Citrix Cloud. You probably would at that point weigh up what would take more effort. And also it could be based around time. So if you need to expand your user base quickly, moving to cloud may seem out of reach, because you have to re-architect in a way. You have to re-architect your infrastructure. You have to install cloud controllers, and you'll repoint your VDAs to those cloud connectors and so on. And you need to think about your access layer, and if you're going to continue to use Citrix Gateway or maybe start using Citrix Workspace. So if you're pressed for time, management, they're telling you we got to support 200 extra users by next week. It's not really going to be a Citrix Cloud in that sense. You probably just build out your on-premise infrastructure and maybe look at cloud at a later time when the pressures aren't so high. Also, you might consider cloud when your licensing is up for renewal. I know sometimes Citrix give nice incentives at renewal time to move to cloud, so you may hold off until that time. Or maybe when it's just the right time to re-architect your solution. So if everything works right now, you can scale up in on-premises without too much effort. You have the extra capacity from a storage and network perspective and from a hypervisor perspective. Then you may think, okay, well, we'll expand on-premises, and come renewal time or come the next large Citrix upgrade that we have to perform, maybe we'll look at cloud at that stage. Because cloud is certainly beneficial, especially now, again, if you run off current release. When you run off current release, you have to keep upgrading every so often. So come the next upgrade, you might think, right, now is the time to start looking at cloud. But again, it really just depends on those several factors. Whatever's right based on the circumstances. Avi, do you want to show how Goliath could maybe monitor Citrix Cloud components?
Sure. Let me share this out. And this is just to show how quickly and easy it is to integrate Goliath into being able to monitor Citrix Cloud environments, where you get the same level of detail of the user sessions that I just showed in the previous demonstration. But as far as being able to set it up, it's just going to, particular VM and enable the Citrix Cloud connector information right here by inputting customer ID, the client ID, and the secret, and then from your Citrix Cloud environment, and then you're all set. Then we can start being able to alert you on, the service and the health of the Citrix Cloud environment. So it's that simple. With that, let me move on to the next question.
Great. So, George, another one that I see here quite a bit, right now that everybody's working remotely, is this. What kind of metrics as an administrator should I be capturing and reporting back to management? And, in all honesty, it's often management pushing this kind of thing down to the administrators, right? But what are some of the things you've seen out there?
Yeah, certainly from my experience, we've seen management want to know more different metrics and different types of metrics that they usually would have requested. But logon time is still one of the critical user experience metrics, and it's definitely one that management aside, it's definitely one that you want to be capturing and reporting on. So I mean, take measurements daily, weekly, monthly, and then compare them over time. Especially with the remote environments, that can change quite drastically logon times. So it's definitely good to take comparisons. And the benefit is, I mean, you can compare logon times and how they've maybe been impacted as you patch your Citrix environments with Microsoft updates. Maybe you patch your infrastructure with Citrix updates, so commutative updates or current release upgrades, and also patching your hypervisors and so on. You want to be comparing the logon times after those changes have been made, just to see if it's had an impact or a negative impact, or maybe even a positive impact in some cases, but most times it can be negative. The other key factor is latency, and that's something that management is certainly keen to get reports on. And it's one of those metrics, again, that really does come into play for the remote workers, more so than it does internal users. So you probably weren't asked when everything or all users were working internally, but now that they're working remotely, management want to get a gauge for what the latency is on an average for the end users. So if it's reported on, again, you might see loose trends that indicate maybe something within your network is not right. So last week, the latency on average was 100 milliseconds. Now this week it's shot up to 150, 160 average. So, what's changed? It might allow you to start with conversations with other IT teams to figure out what has changed to cause that increase. Or maybe there's been configurations within Citrix, like a ADC, Citrix Gateway firmware upgrade, something as simple as that with new code introduced can definitely impact latency. The other metrics that I see are in demand are session availability. So how many users have tried to connect to Citrix remotely in the field. So maybe that could be an end user's fault, or they haven't got receiver installed on their machine, they haven't installed Workspace app, or it could be something with the network. So if you have a high number of those session failures, it could indicate network failures. It could indicate that maybe your Citrix desktops aren't able to connect or aren't able to accept any new sessions. Maybe they have been overloaded, maybe they have been powered off, or a number of them have been powered off, or maybe they've been unregistered for some reason and there's higher contention for the healthy servers. Also for the administrator's benefit, you want to be capturing and reporting again on the usual metrics, which is RAM, CPU, IOPS, because they all contribute heavily to the end user experience. So you really should monitor those closely. And again, report on them as well. So whilst you're reporting on latency and logon duration, also report on CPU and the RAM and all those other metrics. License usage, application usage, again, management in my experience has asked a lot for those. So like, for example, how many people are connecting over VPN if we have VPN deployed? How many people are launching the electronic health record app? How many people are launching Outlook from home? How many people are connecting over Citrix Gateway? So there are a lot of reports that help IT administrators, but also management ask as well. And to be honest, with all the reports that are being asked, it is something that you need a good monitoring solution for, something that's able to provide that reporting capability. Not just reporting capability, but advanced reporting capability. So we need a product that can cover that, because a lot of the time the free tools don't really offer much in ways of reporting and generating those reports. So you might try and have to come up with a way to capture figures manually, which is a waste of your time. So Avi, is there any way that you can show how that is helped by Goliath?
Sure. Yeah, so there are a couple, different performance metrics that you had mentioned there, George. Log on times, latency that you can see here on the end user performance on the left, and these are just a couple different sections of the data that that Goliath will provide. You mentioned application usage, license usage as far as end user activity, then as well as system performance, where we're talking about CPU, memory, disk, all that can be run on demand reports, weekly reports, daily reports sent to different business line managers, so that the right people have the information right in front of them, and also so that they can use that information for capacity planning and future planning as far as the overall health of the environment, and also to be able to compare changes in the environment. Say if you make a certain change, logon times are at 30 seconds, you make a change and it knocked it down to 25 seconds. Awesome, you see that in the report, and then you know that what you just did make, you save 5 seconds on average logon times there. I'll run through a couple of different examples of the reports that we have. Here's our end user experience report, where you can quickly be able to see, the user, the resource, when they connected into the environment, and specifically for this one, what clients will use this for is for the logon duration and ICA latency metrics, so that you can quickly see at a glance, okay, are the majority of our users having, the lower ICA latency metrics, which would be good? Are they having, higher logon duration metrics, which would be bad? And be able to just quickly at a snapshot see that you can have this run for, based off delivery groups. You can have this sent out, first thing in the morning for the previous day. So it gives you that level of, granular detail to be able to make sure that you're having the right reports in front of you to see the health of the environment. Here's another one that's been heavily leveraged during this work from home initiatives and the remote workforce is the end user productivity report, where this report here, this just again, you can see the users, how they connected into the environment, the session start time, session change, the duration of the particular session. This interaction metric here is compiled from a number of different data points. Primarily mouse click, keyboard usage, generating ICA traffic, where you can see based off of the interaction percentage what level of productivity the user is having within their session. So say if you see that a user who's typically a high performer, their interaction percentage is all of a sudden only around maybe 10, 20% of the day, maybe that user is actually having issues at their home office. And, that gives IT the opportunity to reach out to them and see, hey, we see that, you're not able to, however you want to word it, but basically your interaction percentage isn't as high. Is there anything we can do to help you? Be proactive in reaching out to be able to help support your users as best that you can. And those were the reports that I was going to run through. So let me go back to the PowerPoint slide.
Okay, great. So we've got a few more questions that came in, and I think if we want to go to the next slide there. One question we often get asked specifically around Goliath is, how hard is it to get up and running? Well, we have a turnkey program and can get customers up and running in really less than 2 hours. It's a quick service install, and from there you can work with our technical consultants to make sure that you're leveraging all the out-of-the-box functionality and reports and alerts that we have. And a big key in this, right, is that we really talked early on about the embedded intelligence and automation. And so you don't have to go in and define all these metrics. You don't have to define the thresholds. You don't even have to define what the alerts need to be. We will automatically discover the entire environment, your role servers, your gateway services, and all of that, and really draw out a map around it and allow you to leverage our embedded alerts and alert you when you're exceeding those industry standard thresholds. Of course, as George spoke to, you can adjust those for your environment, but they're all right there similarly with the reports. And then the other element is in each of these areas, if you're not sure what the metrics mean, we have health tags that can really identify not only what does the metric stand for, but how to use it in a troubleshooting scenario. So with that, I'm going to start with the questions here. We have some time left, and this one has actually come in from two different individuals, but I'll read it from Ted. Ted wants to know specifically for you, George, to what extent can you use Citrix Director to do some of the things that you were talking about earlier today?
Yeah, so Citrix Director, it has sort of limited amount of data that it provides, right? So it is very Citrix specific, so it doesn't report on other things generally outside of Citrix. So obviously you can get a few off your average logon duration, so how long logons have been taken, over the past hour or the past month or past week, etc. You can see how many users have failed to launch, how many connection failures there has been, and who has been impacted by that. You can also drill down into the individual users. So maybe a user calls up and says that their logon time was slow. You can drill in real time and look at what their logon time was. You can also check their ICA latency, as we discussed, which is obviously the time they click or type into a app or desktop and the time that they see that come out on their screen. And you get a lot of information around the user, how they're connecting, what device they're connecting from, what their host name is, what their IP address is, and so on. Obviously, what desktop, what VDA they're connected to, which would lead you then to maybe investigate the VDA. But yeah, I mean, it's fairly basic. You get logon time breakdown. You can see GPU processing time, and if there's any logon scripts, how long they take to process. But it's just not seriously granular, and it's something that you really need the purpose-built solutions for is when you want to get into the finer details and troubleshooting an issue.
And Avi, maybe do you have that one slide we sometimes use to talk about and kind of the gaps that Goliath can fill? Yeah, that one.
I do. So what I'm showing right here is as far as anything that is not red is really what Citrix, director is focused on being able to report on. Now, everything else that you see in red this kind of shows more of the reality of the whole environment for a lot of people, where you have, the endpoint location, the endpoints, the remote locations, you have your EHR modules, you have your hypervisor platform, your back end systems, the user devices, peripherals, and all of this as far as being able to have it to be able to have the detailed metrics, to be able to pinpoint root cause no matter where it is in the environment, all from a single central console. Our clients will tell us that that is very helpful because, again, with Goliath, we're pulling all of this into the central console. So it just shows, while director does give some fine information, it just shows how there's some parts that it doesn't include, that Goliath we would be able to provide that insight.
Okay, great. We have a question, and I think this is more for you, Avi. Does Goliath offer a view that allows you to see the health of all components, like the gateway services, role servers, etc.?
Yes, we do. And let me actually pull that up in the technology because that is one of my favorite parts of the technology and one that's heavily used as a knock view. What I'll share out right now is our automatic discovery and dependency map for Citrix. And upon deployment, our technology is already looking for, it'll map out your entire delivery infrastructure, show you the correlations between the different elements, and apply over 250 monitoring rules to the environment that are looking for events, conditions, failure points, and thresholds that, if not taken care of, they can impact user experience. And so from this view here, again, this is heavily used as knock view to see those components of the individual who's asking the question for, where you can see, your NetScaler, storefront servers, delivery controllers, any other supporting servers in the environment. And those monitoring rules that I just mentioned drive this heat map structure. So as issues start to take place on individual components, they'll turn from green to red or orange depending on the level of severity, so that you can quickly see where you need to focus your attention, and just as importantly, where you don't need to spend focus your attention on trying to troubleshoot. And with each of these, on the right-hand side, you have resource utilization metrics, context-specific health checks, as well as any alerts that are firing off based off of that embedded intelligence and automation in the technology. And just to show, a couple of the other views here, because you can drill down to the delivery layer where you're able to see the delivery controllers mapped out to the delivery groups, machine catalogs, and gold images if available. And then even taking that down per delivery group down to the hypervisor cluster and individual hypervisor hosts supporting those users, where it allows you to quickly correlate issues that are impacting a number of users instead of just one particular user. Maybe, storage latency or, disk IOPS is running high on a specific, hypervisor host. Maybe some snapshot-based backups were taking place at that time that correlates when those users were having issues, so that then the user of the technology can easily reach out to the storage team and say, hey, this is what we're seeing. Does this correlate on your end? And be like, oh yeah, we were doing these, actions at that same time. We'll then, we'll move those, efforts to a different time when users aren't going to be as impacted. Again, it's typically used as a knock view, but it can be used as a troubleshooting stop because you can always drill into those different components and see what could be impacting users. So I know that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but yeah, this is a view that's typically used for that.
All right. I know we're running a little low on time, but I think some of these are quick-hitting questions. Leo asks, and I think this is, again, more for Avi, can you quickly identify in your reports who's a home worker versus someone who's in the office?
Absolutely. You can check that, how they connected into the environment, whether, NetScaler, storefront, and you can check it by the client IP address, and all that can be reported on based off of those specified metrics. Absolutely.
And then James asks, do you need an agent on every single machine to capture these metrics?
We do not. just to answer the question overall, we don't need to deploy any technology to the endpoint machines themselves. We do deploy a lightweight intelligent agent onto the VDAs and the infrastructure servers as well. But we have an agentless approach with the hypervisor platform. So it's an agent and agentless approach.
And George, Teresa asks, they're looking to move their infrastructure to Azure versus on-prem with Citrix. Any thoughts or feedback on that?
Yeah, well, one of the sort of large Citrix announcements last year was that you can't have management on premises. So if you're moving to Azure, you need to use Citrix Cloud as the management. As far as I know, so there is details on that. I think there's a CTX article. But as far as moving to Azure goes, no, I haven't heard any negatives around it. Obviously, you just need to pay more attention to VM uptime. And Citrix have technologies like Smart Autoscale that allows you to control when virtual machines are powered off and powered on based on maybe user percentage load and what day and time of the week it is. So that's just one of the different type of challenge that you have is keeping the cost down with Azure, and because it certainly can get a bit more expensive, especially the more VMs you have and the more more resource they consume and the longer they are powered on at any one time.
And when it comes to migrating to cloud, if you're looking to make the move, and I know, Avi, we've done this with a couple of our clients, using our technology is great for baselining. We can baseline your end user experience and performance as your environment sits today, and then once you migrate to the cloud, you can confirm that the end user is seeing no difference from an experience and performance standpoint, and hopefully better. All right, that was the last question we have time for today. If you've asked a question today that we didn't get to in this session, we will follow up via email. If you have more questions for George following this webinar, you can find George on Twitter at JG If you're looking for a free trial, have additional questions, or would like a custom demo, please email techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com and we'll be happy to get back to you. So, George, again, really want to thank you for joining us today. And Avi, as always, it's a joy to have you here. And thanks to all of you out there who spent the time with us today. Thank you and have a great rest of your week.